So balancing training and low periods of energy. This is a really common issue that so many hikers run into on their training journey. And this is coming out from a question or a situation that I kind of got from a client this week. And this isn't the exact question they sent me, but it's close enough. But basically the situation was, they've been training consistently for months now, really trying to just push. And they had a big trip coming up and they're trying to push and push and push. And they've been improving across the board, getting fitter, getting stronger. Improving. But lately, just in the last week or two, I've actually noticed I'm getting really tired. I'm exhausted. I've got no energy. What should I do? Because I have a trip coming up. I'm moving towards that. It's still a few months away, but it is coming up. And I am worried about not being ready. Now, this is a really, really, really common situation. And I would sort of say that this is probably something that every single hiker, or 90% of hikers, will run into when they're doing a longer term training journey. So if you're just training for 8 weeks or maybe 12 weeks, you may not run into this. But if you're taking a bit of a longer approach and you're trying to train for 4 months or 5 months or 6 months or 12 months leading up to an adventure, this is probably something you will run into at some point. Because even taking training out of the equation, and we're not even thinking about actually training and exerting ourselves and expending all this energy, we know there are periods where we go through where we are very energetic, and there are periods where we go through when we are a little bit flatter, a little bit lower in energy, and not feeling as amazing. And that is just a natural tendency for life, because there's so many factors that can go into our energy, our sleep, our stress, our nutrition, our hydration, all of this different stuff. So in a normal situation, these dips in energy are really, really normal. And then when we're looking at a training journey, obviously we are adding extra things. We're challenging the body, we're expending energy, we're intentionally overloading the body in certain ways so it will be forced to adapt and to change. And if we are just from week after week and month after month after month trying to push and improve, there will come a point where it just gets a little bit too much. There will come a point where we're like, oh my gosh, I'm knackered. There will come a point where you're like, I'm not feeling super great here. And there's typically 2 ways you can approach this. Number one, some people are like, hey, I've got these signs, I'm a bit low on energy. Maybe I'll just keep on pushing through. Maybe I'll just keep on working hard. Maybe I'll just keep on trying to push my training there and see how I go. And that can kind of work temporarily. You can probably get through a week or 2, sometimes even 3. But as a long-term solution, probably not. The other way of going about things is just being nice to yourself, reducing things down and adjusting around. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And this is typically what I recommend for most hikers. Now, the solution here is if you are at a point where you're like, oh, I'm just knackered. Number one, be nice to yourself here. Realistically, if you're getting these early warning signs of being tired, if you're getting these early warning signs of being fatigued, we want to reduce things down a little bit. And essentially what we want to do is reduce things down temporarily to help your body and mind recover. So we don't want to be in this position where we end up just doing absolutely nothing and just sort of say, oh my gosh, I'm tired, I'm going to have a completely week off. Because it may work for energy, but it can ruin our routine. And routine, as we said earlier, is such a crucial thing for long-term success. Routine and momentum is just so valuable. But we also want to respect the energy. So essentially what we want to do here is we don't want to fall out of routine, but we do want to give the body some space to bounce back. So there are many, many, many different ways you can approach this, but this is a simple way that I think is very, very holistic. It can work for a lot of people, and I think it may be worthwhile looking into. So a simple way to approach this is if you're coming into this point where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm knackered. Just take 1 week where you reduce pretty much everything in your training down by about 50%. So what I mean by that is you keep the normal training sessions per week. So if you're training 5 days a week, you keep that and you keep your normal sessions. But what you do is you reduce each of the sessions you're doing. So on the strength, you might just reduce the reps you're doing by half. So if an exercise you were doing was 10 repetitions with a certain amount of weight, this week you just do 5 repetitions with the same amount of weight. Or if you're doing cardio, just half the time. If you've gone out for a walk for 60 minutes, do it for 30 minutes. If you've gone out for a run for 20 minutes, just do it for 10 minutes. If you've gone out for a cycle or whatever, half the time. Same thing with hiking. Like if you're hiking every single week, just half the distance of the time that you did the week before or the last time you went out. The idea behind this is we keep up the routine, we still get some exposure to these types of things, but it should feel way more manageable. It should feel pretty easy, even though you are pretty low on energy, and it should feel pretty doable. And then you can get to the end of the week and you can sit down and just ask yourself, how am I feeling? If you get to the end of the week of doing this reduced stuff and you get the end and you're like, you know what, I'm actually back to normal. I bounced back, I'm feeling great, I'm ready to roll, then cool. You've had your week chill out, you've kept your routine, and next week just go back to your normal training and should all be good. Alternatively, if you get to that end of the week and you're like, oh, you know what, I'm feeling better, but I'm not quite right, then just take another week where you reduce another week of reduced things. But this week, instead of doing that 50% reduction, do about 75% of what you're doing before. So it's not your full training load, it's not that completely reduced training load, but it's kind of in the middle. So you'll go 50% reduction first week, 75% reduction the next week, and then by then you should be back to normal and then kind of get into things from there. Now, that's a really, really simple way to approach these types of things. That's probably not really treating the symptoms or treating the cause. It's like, hey, this is how I deal with the situation, but it's not actually looking at what has caused this. If this is sort of something, if it just happens once in a blue moon, that's fine. You can just deal with it or whatever it may be. But if it is a regular thing or a semi-regular thing, or you've noticed it happens once a month or once every 5 weeks or whatever it may be, you probably need to look into other areas. Nutrition, really, really important. Are you eating enough? Are you fueling enough to make sure you have the energy? This is a tricky situation, particularly if you're a hiker who is trying to train hard, and a lot of hikers, when they're in their training goals, they have a concurrent weight loss journey they're going through. Now, this isn't something I'm a massive advocate for when you're trying to both lose weight and improve your fitness and strength if you're hiking, because it can be a little bit tricky, but I'm aware that a lot of people do that. So if you are falling into this category and you're like, hey, my nutrition, I'm either intentionally restricting my eating or I'm just not feel like I'm eating enough, this is something you need to look into and maybe talk to a dietitian or whatever it may be, get some particular help there. Or it might be sleep. Maybe it might be a case if you only sleep 5 hours a night, you only sleep 4 hours a night, or the last couple of months you've been sleeping awfully. Then you might want to think about, okay, if I'm only sleeping 5 hours, what can I do to maybe squeeze in an extra half an hour each week? If I'm sleeping terribly, what can I do that may be able to help my sleep? Can I keep my room a bit cooler? Can I use a bit more magnesium? Can I use some sleep aids or whatever it may be? Have a think about that. Recovery. What are you doing in the week to actually promote recovery? Are you training hard every single day? Are you giving your body time to relax and recover? And on top of that, are you actually doing things which will promote recovery? So doing gentle active recovery sessions of just cycling or walking very, very gently. Are you doing some stretching or some self-massage or whatever it may be? Are there little things in the week you do to help with this? And then also training load. Are you just doing too much? If you're training every single day, maybe pull it back a day. If you're training 5 days a week and you're getting tired all the time, maybe pull it back a bit. If you're doing 2 hours every single day, maybe pull it back a bit. If this is an ongoing thing, training load is another big thing you want to look into. So this is a situation a lot of people get into. And I would sort of say 90% of situations and 90% of times, reducing things down is kind of the right answer. Now, the only time in this situation that I would recommend actually going the other way, and instead of pulling things back, instead of relaxing, instead of taking things easy, and instead of that, but actually pushing through this, is if you are right before a trip and if you are feeling significantly underprepared. So what I mean by that is typically when it comes down to a trip, and typically when it comes down to leading up to an adventure, we usually want to have maybe a week or two of what we call taper before a trip, in the sense of last week or two before you go away, you kind of pull things back, similar to what we talked about, to give the body time to adapt, to consolidate all the training you've been doing and make sure you're fresh. So if you're in this situation where you're like, I'm 4 weeks out from my adventure and I'm tired, I've got low energy, I'm not feeling amazing. If you're 4 weeks out, you realistically only have 2 more weeks of training or pushing, and then you're going to have a planned pullback anyway. So in that situation, maybe it might be a good idea just to push through for those 2 weeks, because you'll then have 2 weeks of calming down. Might be a good idea. Obviously to extremes, and if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I can barely get out of bed, obviously you need to walk around that, but that would be the only situation where I'd sort of say maybe push through. If you're right before a trip or right before a planned break and you are feeling a bit underprepared, that might be a good option. But if you are in a situation where, you are leading into a trip or you're training and you're just going through low periods of energy, I'd strongly recommend just pull things back a little bit, take a little bit easier for yourself, and it can go a long, long way.